Everybody good? Because last thing we want is confusion. That's a problem, isn't it? All right. So this is fun. Bones are they're just a lot of fun. I personally like everything about A&P. Otherwise, I wouldn't teach it, right? But this is a fun one. It's fun. It's fun because like the skin, you see this, right? I see all these processes. So when you start looking at each other, if you really want to be serious students, you really want to go into health profession, right? You're going to start seeing these processes and these features about bone because it shows up in the skin, right? Our whole shape is because of these bones, right? We just put skin and muscle on this thing, right? So that's it. But it's pretty cool, right? And now we've kind of gotten because we talked about osseous tissue, right? And I'm gonna part that there if you guys need it over here because I should go steal some more, shouldn't I? But you guys are starting bone in lab today, so they're probably not going to give me any models. All right, so here's what I have in this room. Bone is these packages, right? Now this is a piece of what we call compact bone, right? It's like they sliced it out. The whole thing would be really big and go all the way around here, right? And I always say to students too, look, if you're a meat eater, take advantage of, because you're probably not eating the bones. They're good sources. Oh yeah, but it's just not, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? Sometimes we use them for soups, right? Because inside the bones is this wonderful marrow, right? This soft tissue that's either got fat, oh yummy in soups, right? Yellow marrow, or there's red marrow, which is a source of blood cells. So you got a lot of iron there, don't you? All right? So there's a lot to be had from these bones, but we end up not doing that, right? But you can still use them to study, right? If you eat chicken, right? Of course, there's boneless chicken. It's not going to help you there, right? If it's hamburger, it's not going to help you. There's probably bone in it, but it was ground so fine you don't realize it's there, right? Okay? But use that. And it's not weird. You're healthcare professionals, right? You can justify just about anything now, right? So that's what you want to do. You want to think about, well, what is this? Okay? So, the grizzle that you might experience in me is probably the cartilage, right? Or it could be some of the dense connective tissue that we find in tendons and ligaments. So tendons are going to connect the muscles to the bones, right? So when I look at these models back here, yeah, I know this is going to be a challenge, isn't it? Yeah, I'm not that big. All right, so here we're attaching. This is nice, dense, regular, but it's white because we realized it was avascular. And this is going to be holding muscles to bone. That'll be called a tendon. All right? If it's a bone to a bone, it's a ligament. You're not used to that kind of terminology. It's just the difference in the name for it. It's the same basic concept. We got to hold this stuff together. Here's how we do it. All right? And so these, anytime you see gray on these models, that's a tendon. All right? If it's between two bones, it's a ligament. Right? And of course, you'll have a whole chapter devoted to joints, which is going to talk about all those ligaments, and it'll throw in some of the tendons as well. All right? Now I feel trapped. No, I'm kidding. Right, all right. So you really, again, take advantage of your lab time. Spend time outside the lab with, photos or models, and be thinking about again, what is this? What's the purpose of this? Why does it look this way? That's a good question in bones because they do look some way for purpose. All right. So we always have to start off by saying, okay, what was the point? Why did we need this system? What does it do for us? How does that tie us back to those characteristics of life, right? So most of you could have definitely given me these two, right? If I came in the first day of class and said, okay, what are your bones good for? You'd probably say support and protection. And I'd be, oh yeah, all right, we know something. That's important, right? And then, movement. So again, the bones, we got to remember, the bones themselves are not moving. They are rocks, but they are being moved by muscle because muscle tissue moves things, right? So they function together with the muscle. All right, and just remark, as far as simple machines, you've got levers here, and that's, again, hopefully straightforward. What is not obvious, and here we have this picture again of these marrows. And yellow marrow is more yellow, and some red marrow here, right? Is that bone stores minerals. So in its matrix, remember, because this is a specialized, this is support connective tissue. In the matrix of it is going to be a lot of calcium, phosphate, some magnesium, all of these, right? Ions, they can become ionized, I should say. They're not ions at the point, they're combined. but they're sources of ions that we also call electrolytes. Yellow marrow being fat means I can store some energy with the fat, right? You got plenty of places to put fat, but it does serve that purpose. And then all of your blood cells, all of them, red blood cells, platelets, right? Your white blood cells come from that red marrow. So there is I say here, pluripotent stem cell. So taking us back to the idea about the stem cells in chapter 3. So this pluripotent stem cell has this name, hematocytoblast. Let's put that in there, hematocytoblast. So here's that blast again, and I said when you see the blast, you always want to think of builder, right? Because we're going to emphasize the osteoblasts again in this chapter, like we introduced them when we talk about tissues. So this cell is what resides in red bone marrow, and it does this process. That's the name of the process of making blood cells, because, right, the hemato is reference to blood. Right, so.
How do you pronounce that?
So that's a hematocytoblast. Okay. It's a cell, and this is the process of making blood cells, hematopoiesis. Yep. All right. What do bones look like? This should be lab today for you guys, right? You know, you did skin on Tuesday, or if you were Wednesday lab, you've already done this, right? But yeah, you've got 5 basic. Now, I always say to students, look, this is a little bit subjective, all right? Just a little bit. You go to different sources, and some may disagree on where you categorize them. This is not the important thing about bones, but we do teach this, and we want you to get to think about, hey, why does it look this way, right? What is that? What? Because shape, right? Structure is function. So I say here again, and I asked that on those questions. I said, your long bones, which this is going to be most of what we call the axial skeleton. Can you see around the thing, Sam? Okay. So this is going to be your axial. So almost everything on these upper limbs and lower limbs are long bones, including these really tiny ones. Look at our skeleton over here. Your distal phalanges we were talking about for your fingernails. They're still long bones, okay? And so these are levers, right? They do a lot of movement, and this works well for this. Short bones are really only the carpals, because we'll collectively put them together, so carpals. So again, you'll notice shape is way different when I look at the carpals versus the phalanges and metacarpals. Metacarpals are, of course, your palm. And the tarsals. Tarsals are a little bit bigger version in your foot, but that's considered your ankle area. No, that's really made up of these processes around that. Tibia and fibula. So tarsals. Those are short bones, all right? So they give stability and support. So they're not going to be doing a whole lot of movement, is what we're saying, all right? Stability, all right? Flat bones, that's a lot of what we're looking at in what we call the axial skeleton. So appendicular, you're hanging off. Axial, you're right in the middle, the axis. So on a lot of bones in the axial skeleton are flat. Which again, it's just, you know, your costals here, your ribs, and flat bones. These bones are what we call the cranium, right? Form that support of the skull or that protection. And they are pretty protective. That's really a good job for them. They're also being flat, they have a lot of surface area to allow attachment. So all these muscles in the torso area, right, in the head are going to attach to these. You're going to have lots of broad attachments. Irregular, that's kind of like none of the above, right? You're not long, right? You're not longer than you are wide. You're not squarish for a short. And you're not flat. So we really can't put you easily into those. So irregular, these are cool ones. I mean, clearly your vertebra and your sacrum fit into this, right? And we'll reel out our skeleton if I can possibly make it come out here, right? So clearly these vertebrae, crazy attachment points on them, right? But all kind of doesn't fit into long or flat, right? Sacrum is like this. You could argue again that the scapula is probably an irregular, though it has also got flat tendencies. That's why I said it can become subjective. The coccyx, the 2 hip bones, they're pretty irregular. right? So you've got a number of crazy facial bones that are regular, including things like your ethmoid bone, which is a cranial bone. Because the facial bones are the ones, again, when we divide up the skull, we say, okay, there's the stuff that encompasses the brain, and then there's the stuff that makes up the face, right, and the shape of our face. So if you're a facial bone, it's really what you see looking straight on. If you're a cranial bone, you are surrounding the brain. Right? And a number of the cranial ones are flat. A number of the facial, right, have these irregular. They're not quite dislocated, his jaw, and so, whoops, sorry, right, so. And then there is one category which we have a few bones. One of them consistently, because you don't always see these on other the ones in the feet, but a consistent sesamoid or round bone is your patella. All right, so it's actually kind of heart shaped, but that, round, nobody, heart shaped was a little too much for the anatomist. So the patella is round. Sesamoid also means that it's surrounded by tendons. So in other words, it doesn't directly come close to another bone, which it doesn't actually. It sits over the femur and the distal, what we call the distal epiphyses, further away epiphyses of the femur, and it doesn't make contact with the tibia fibula. So and so then you have a few of these in the feet too. Yes.
So what about the bones inside the skull on the bottom portion? Where they have like the different.
Yeah. So inside here, your ethmoid is irregular and your sphenoid is irregular. All right. So they're not going to be flat because when you look at them, the sphenoid actually looks like a butterfly. It's spread out. It comes from side to side. It's one bone that really creates kind of the front wall, if you will. And then your ethmoid bone creates your nasal septum, right? It divides that. So, but it also helps seal the brain in. And in fact, on the ethmoid bone are features in which the membranes surrounding the brain attach. So that's why when you look at a skull, right? And this is a good time for that. And since you guys got your bone model, we'll give you guys a skull. Right? Just to be thinking about bones, right? Right? If you look inside the skull here, that's the ethmoid bone. That's what's nice about these casts. And that's where the meninges attach. So that's an anchor for the membranes that surround the brain. I gotta find something for you guys. Something here. Right, we'll so that's the ethmoid right there. And that's that's the cristigale. And the cristigale, it means coxcomb. So it's like a rooster's comb. And that cristigale is where your meninges attach and anchors them to the bone. Right? And oh my, it's a Thursday, isn't it? I know, I was going that way. All right, so here's see, I'm not gonna leave you out, David. There we go. All right, and we also have this model, right? So since Amanda's having a good time with the skull, we get to see you guys. All right, so. But you should have fun. All right, this is a time to have fun. When you guys get into those boxes, we'll have all of this articulated skeletons divided up into axial and appendicular skeleton. We have real bones, we have synthetic bones. Get in there and separate them. Do like what you did when you were this guy's age, right? You took and you separated them out. No, you didn't do that, right? So you took them out, you separated things by colors and shapes. And that's what we as humans excel at, right? So take that with your bones, right? And take that opportunity. And have a good time. And think why. As you pull those bones out, think why they look that way. What is this going to allow it to do? All right?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Maybe off topic, but
Can we get any more off topic than Monty Python?
what is this called?
So that's a suture. All right? So these will be in your joints, guys. Because you guys are going to look at the skull in its entirety. We're not going to take out a parietal bone and leave it on the table. Okay? So you'll look at skulls just like this in your lap, okay? These are sutures, which are a type of fibrous joint that we're going to cover in the next, in chapter 9 after that. But this is where they articulate. They come together. So we actually call this the coronal suture because that's a coronal cut, okay? And these are sagittal, okay? And then we have squamous and we have lamboid, and sometimes we name them for shapes and sometimes we name them for position, but yeah. So, and this is a fatal wound. Right?
Yeah, it's broken.
I gotta bring you all back. I gotta stop being silly. All right, so we have a chance to survive today. So, long bones. We want to give you some basic vocabulary here. That's what this chapter is about. Give you the foundation, so as you go through and you start studying those bones in lab, and you look over these chapters in open stacks, you understand. So what are some common things? Well, for long bones, which again, remember these are our basic, right, appendicular skeleton, they give us a lot of movement because they work as levers. You got to have this feature that we call the diaphysis. You got to have these ends that we call the epiphysis. I'm sorry, it's just something you have to learn. Epi is on top of, so epiphysis has got that going for it. All right? You cover, and this is where if you eat chicken, and chicken legs, right? Might be a good one, they're pretty common, drumsticks are cheap, right? And if you eat one of those, and even after it's cooked, the cooking makes bones brittle, you're still going to see this. If you go down to the bone, you'll see the very delicate, well, in nature it's thin, it's not that delicate, but connective tissue that surrounds the bone. You can scrape this off. You can peel it off. And so around the bones, like all things in the body, are going to be a layer of connective tissue that's not bone tissue, right? Not osseous. It's basically and generally going to be a dense connective tissue, but it's called the periosteum because it's around the bone, right? Like the perimeter is around something. So the periosteum, there's our word root that always means bone, is going to surround this. Now, this also allows for attachments to be made. So connective tissue connects, generalized connective tissue can connect easily to other connective tissue. So this means that we're not directly connecting to the actual rock. We make connections on, right, this periosteum. All right? Within the diaphysis, which is also called the shaft, so it runs generally about here to here, it's a support column. So that model that you guys have, the microscopic model, that's a piece of the diaphysis from a long bone. And if you got to cut a meat which just has that circle of bone in it, you ever seen that? That's a piece of a long bone, right? Because that's nice compact bone that gives lots and lots of support. So here's what you have. You actually have the outside peri. You have another layer on the other side of the wall of bone. Again, wall of bone called the endosteum. So endo inside. So this is trying to be represented here as this nice light peach color, right? On one of your other models, it's like gray. I don't know, like gray, like those are gray back there. So what is this doing again? It's containing the osseous tissue and separating it from the other types of tissues, okay? So the endosteum inside, we're going to find this inside in that diaphysis, that shaft. All right, and then in the middle is that space, that's where cavity comes in, and it's in the middle, so we call it the medulla, because medullas are in the middle of things. Right, whenever we talk about the structure from here on out, we often talk about them as having a cortex, an outer part, and a medulla, a middle part. That's a very common compartment in an organ. And please think of your bone as an organ, because it is. Okay? So, medullary cavity with marrow in it. If it's a long bone, this tends to be yellow marrow, tends to be fat. And that's again why you find that cut in meat, and people use those in soups. Right? Yeah, Kim.
So why does it, I can't think of any other real organs that do this that much, but why does it change from like a vascular area creating red blood cells and essentially shifts to collecting fat?
It's probably just the cost of maintaining the tissue, but that is a huge guess evolutionarily. Okay? Because the medulla, as you probably know, it has to be there to lighten the weight of bone. Because at some point there's a trade-off. I need support, but if I become so heavy, then an organism can't move, right? Or they take so much energy to move that they become too costly for the world, the ecosystem, all right? So the trade-off, even as bone grows with us, what we call is apositional growth, when it widens as opposed to lengthens, we'll go through both of these. When it grows wide, it tends to remove dense bone from the medullary cavity and add it to the outside. So the density of the bone isn't changing a whole lot, actually. They get a little bit denser, but not tremendously. Because again, Your bones cannot weigh so much that you can't move them. So why, and again, whenever we put fat and fiber, it's a cheap tissue. So my guess is we needed a filler, because we didn't need hollow bones like birds, right? There was if we had hollow bones, that would make them more fragile as well, right? But maintaining this really active tissue like red marrow is probably just too energetically expensive. That's a total guess.
Yeah, because you're looking like connective tissue, and then if you have calcifications and you get injuries, I'm like, well, that seems like they'd be shifting you some more energy to shift from those connective to fat.
Yeah, and so it could, and again, we put fat in because it is a ready supply, because this is an active tissue. So, all right, so then the diaphysis where it meets the epiphyses, and epiphyses are going to be the very ends, is called the metaphysis, and meta is middle. So it's not really in the middle in the sense here or within here, but it is between the two parts. So there is a region that we call the metaphysis and metaphysis, and you don't have to, your lab instructor may or may not point that out, because it may not be obvious. Because what you've got in lab is all adult bones. So these are really regions that change as the bones lengthen, especially, okay, and when the bones ossify, which they did. You guys are all beyond puberty, so you're adding bone only to the outsides, as we were talking about the apositional growth. Your nova bones are not getting longer, otherwise you'd wake up the next morning and be taller. This young man, right, he's still got a long way to go, doesn't he? So he's going to keep on adding, right? So that's a good, that's what you want to think about. So this again is a region where your instructor will talk about the epiphyseal plate becomes a line. So the plate is a growth zone, and it's between the parts, and it's found here again in this metaphysis, right? So here they're showing you the line because this is an adult. If this was a young child, it'd still be a zone, and it'd be a zone of cartilage. Just to be clear, because you might be asking that, right? What do you mean a zone? It'd be cartilage. So the cartilage, when it's replaced entirely by bone, you stop lengthening the bone. It doesn't continue to get longer, okay? So that's a growth zone, right? So the epiphyses, proximal and distal, because this is the femur, and this is where it's going to, that's the head where it's going to contact the acetabulum of the coxon, right? This is another name for your hip bone, the coxon, right? So that's the proximal epiphyses, and this is of course where it contacts the tibia, and that's a distal. Okay, this is mostly spongy bone, so it doesn't look like that. It looks almost entirely like this part, because as the bone transitions from compact to the medullary cavity and marrow, you start to see a little bit of what we call spongy bone, even in compact bone. Well, the epiphyses would be all this. It wouldn't be this, right? There'd be a really, really thin layer. It'd be like this big. And then most of it would be this spongy, right? This is spongy because it looks like it has holes in it. Okay? And in that spongy bone, as Gail was asking, that's where you'd find some red marrow. That's where you'd find in those spaces would be. And this makes bone really good shock absorber, actually, to have spongy bone here as opposed to compact bone. And then on the end of the epiphyses, as we go on and talk about joints, would be a cap of cartilage. Now, why do we want to put cartilage, and you don't see it on these because they've got, obviously, pins to hold this together. This is not what we want, but this is holding the skeleton together. Why would we want to put just a little bit of thin hyaline cartilage over this head and lining this? And why? What would rubbing together cause?
Deterioration.
Degradation, what's a good word for that though when we talk about bone? Erosion? Yeah. They're rocks, aren't they? They rub together, you take two rocks and rub them together, they're gonna erode, right? So you put a little coating of cartilage there, and we call it articular because that's articulations adjoining. There, and you got cushioning, don't you? So these two hard surfaces can press together, and they can take a lot of pressure, can't they? You guys who have done a lot of movement in your lives, and they take a lot, and you don't get shorter, and you don't end up hurting a lot, right? Because That's what happens when people displace the cartilage, like back here, the discs, when they get displaced, well, bone gets together or bone hits nerve, because everything needs to be in its place. So in a joint like the knee, if you have erosion of the cartilage, because cartilage, when it's damaged, heals slowly, and as we get older, it doesn't replace itself so well, yeah. You know, you can understand why, knowing how this works. So that's our, again, we're just trying to give you guys a basic idea about bone. What do you want to consider? Well, when we look at this again, the endosteum inside, right? So here's our periosteum. We're really looking at these spaces here. Here's our spongy bone shown over here. Here's some compact bone over here with the periosteum. I said the endosteum is a place of bone growth, repair, and remodeling. That's because of the cells you find there. So we'll get to that. All right. So spongy bone, you get these branching plates like you guys are seeing on that model, and even on this model here, right? You can see that you guys have, you can see this idea of branching. So trabeculi is another word we use for it. Sometimes we call this cancellous bone, spongy bone. It's all the same thing. So you didn't have to put forth the effort to make a sheet. You didn't need a solid rock wall. You just made these branching pieces. And again, physically, this makes this area a better shock absorber. It can transfer force without injury. Okay. So I say here in the flat, because flat, short, and irregular bones, because we've just been talking solely about long bones, but in the other categories, we kind of see, as I said, this sheet of compact, and then a lot of spongy. And this, of course, makes those bones a little bit lighter as well, so we get that trade-off that, yes, we can hold our heads upright because our bone isn't so heavy that we just want to do this all the time, right? Or that all the time, right? You've got some trade-offs, okay? So now we'll be looking at a couple of these types of cells, and this is why we're talking about the endosteum. Here's the inner part, and we see here's a big bone destroyer, the osteoclast. Right, here's a bone builder, and it came from this osteogenic cell. We're going to get to these guys. So this is the parent of this cell and this cell ultimately, because this cell becomes that cell. Right? So as an adult, again, most of your bone is going to be osteocytes, which is literally bone cells. And that's what you're going to see inside all that matrix. That's what, here as I'm looking at all these osteons, these little tiny pillars inside this big support column pillar, right? All these little spaces and these kind of strange looking things, those are all those osteocytes. They're all within the bone proper. Only at the borders will you still retain, right, these osteoblasts, okay? And some of these stem cells that we call osteogenic, so generating bone, okay? And then these, again, osteoclasts are going to look way different. They're going to come from actual monocytes. They come from a whole different cell line. Of course, a monocyte is made by the red marrow, because that's a blood cell. But changes its genes, becomes, and not its genes, right? Obviously, it changes its DNA expression, right? Becomes an osteoclast. And this is an absorber. So you're going to see the destroyers or dissolvers of bone very close to the builders. Okay, so that's not a fluke. Most of what you're going to see again in the bones, the models you look at, are going to be a bunch of osteocytes. And osteocytes maintain bone. They simply just keep it functional and healthy. Okay? And then architecturally, on a big scale, you see the spongy and the compact bone made of all these different cell types. There we go. Bone markings. This is so much fun. It really is. Once you get used to it, because it's a completely new language for everybody. All right, it's like what I always say to students, it's medical terminology 101 at its finest when you do bone markings. Right? I say to students, hey, put these into groups to make your lives a little easier. First, give them. I got 4 big categories that I like to use. All right. When I'm looking at bone, though, that's what, right, because we told you it's made of compact and spongy, but you're going to determine their differences by these markings, right, by these shapes and these markings. So what do they mean? Okay, So here again, articulations is still going to be where two bones meet. So I've already remarked about the head. There's a head to the femur. There's a head to the humerus. Okay? Facets are flat. Heads tend to be rounded, so they do different shapes. So facets, a good one to see these are where the vertebrae come together, right? You've got these 26, and so here's where two of them are coming together. Facets are flat surfaces that meet. Condyles also tend to be rounded. So a condyle, here at the end of the femur, that distal epiphyses, these are condyles. Nice, tend to be round, but articulations, they're places where bone is coming together, right? So when I'm looking at this and trying to learn all these names, think about that. Lots of projections, so a lot of things, because this is again where muscle's going to attach. Most of the projections you see on bone are there for some muscle to make contact and do some sort of movement. So all these cool shapes here, those are all projections, right? And here, projections, right? This is called the trochanter. This is going to be, and the bigger they are means the more we use that muscle and the more force we generate with that muscle. Because bone grows by stress and strain, right? Pull. So as a muscle is attached and you shorten the muscle, it pulls on the bone. That movement actually aligns, right, charges in the bone, right, plus and minus, and causes those osteoblasts to become more active. So the more you use a muscle, the more you will deposit bone at the attachment. And that's why if you looked at, a young man or a baby, right, who first came out, and you studied their bones, you wouldn't see these brilliant projections all over them. Because this is the history of your life, looking at your skeleton. This is what you did. And that's why we can use bones forensically. A, they last because they're a rock, all right? And B, they tell you how you lived your life. So projections come in lots of different names, but I always tell students, just get used to that, right? A lot of them are processes. Sometimes if they're really thin, we call them the spine. Tubercles tend to be little tiny bumps. There's a greater or lesser tubercle on your humerus. It's up here, right? And you can always find it because between it is a little valley where the tendon for the biceps passes, okay? Your tuberosities tend to be bigger bulges. So this is your ischial tuberosity back here. Get a bigger bulge because you use these muscles a whole lot more than you do these muscles up here. All right? Lines and crests, lines are just what they are. And crests, you actually call that a spine as well, by the way. But a crest, they're just less evident, but crests would be like right here. So I don't usually make the students learn the crests and lines, but we do have, the spines and tubercles and some of the processes. Holes are in bones so things can move. Because it's a solid wall, right? Like this. If I want to get a nerve from one part of the body to another part of the body, think the brain is totally encased in there. I got to put a hole. So turn those skulls upside down for me, anybody who's got a skull, and look at all those crazy holes. Because that's where they come out, the nerves and the blood.
So the sinuses, so the tubercles and the tuberosities, and they all at one point hold a vein or a
No, they're
vessel
going to hold an attachment. So yeah, that'll be where a muscle attaches. Yeah. So no, so the sinuses, the sinuses. You probably don't have any. These are casts of skulls. We do have some real bones in here. These are all casts. So the sinuses, you've got them in the bones that surround the nose because they open up to the nasal cavity, right? To equalize pressure and to help with, and again, help lighten the bones, or the bones themselves. So it's not this hole, obviously, but the frontal area, you've got frontal sinuses that sit right about here, right? You have maxillary sinuses right about here. Your ethmoid has sinuses, and your sphenoid have sinuses. And then some of your other bones have what we call air cells in them, so just not as big a space that tend to be closed. So Those are lined with mucous membranes, so bone is never exposed to the outside world, because that's bad, right? It's a bad sign if you see that, okay? And, but they do, right, it lines it and lightens these bones a little bit. It helps with sound and communication, and again, it helps with controlling quality of air that enters into the lungs, right? So many of the holes that let nerves and blood vessels pass are called foramen. So, and then we distinguish the foramen. So every single one of these holes down here is some foramen. So I tell students, look, I'm going to give you partial credit if you can tell me the name of a hole. I mean, you won't necessarily remember. This, of course, is the magnum, the big hole, right? And you all know that's where the brain leaves is the spinal cord. The big hole. You got to get it out there, right? So, and then a lot of these, you have names. It might go with some of them are the rotundums. Some of them is called a lacerium, right? Some of them are called just the jugular for the name of the vessel. It just depends on who you read, okay? And then you have a lovely hole here. The sound has to enter in, right? The perception of sound is in here. I got to get sound energy in there. So this external acoustic meatus. So this is not a foramen. A meatus is a tongue, right, versus a hole. Okay? But they all serve some purpose, right? And then there are things that are depressions, and there's only a couple, like I said, we talk about fossa and fovea. Fossa is a larger one. So again, as you look at the skull, that's why these skulls are nice to have around us. Those are all fossa. And usually the lab instructors don't ask you to name what they with fossa, but those are all fossa, right? In the hips, they're fossa. In the scapula, there's a fossa. All right? And then a fovea, the only fovea we have you guys learn is on the head of the femur. When you look at this, because I can't take it out and show that to you, but if you look at that, there's a little bitty depression. And it's a blood vessel and nerve that run through there. But it's a little, and so it's a tiny fossa, so we call it fovea. All right? So, you want to remember the bones again, and that's why, of course, your bones cannot be formed, right, in their full osseous state when you're young. Because you're going to grow to accommodate all these soft tissues. So, the holes are generally going to have to be there. They'll just, right, they'll get larger as your vessels get larger and so forth. But, so you have the basis, you have the shape, because obviously a little human looks like a big human for the most part, right? It got fingers and toes and all the parts. So the shapes are there, but I'm just telling you, you're going to adapt to your lifestyle. You're going to adapt to what happens in your life with this bone. So this bone's got to be changing, okay? So just to think about for us. All right, so here's again our cells. Right, so they look a little bit different again. This osteogenic cell is a stem cell, right? It gives rise to the osteoblasts and the osteocytes. This osteoclast, the destroyer, comes from a different cell type, okay? So this matrix, right, calcium phosphate, with some magnesium in it, is made by these cells, right? So, by the way, they're going to need that calcium. So before you were born, where'd that calcium come from? Mom, yeah, right? She had to increase her intake of calcium. And of course, the phosphate came with it typically. It's not hard for us to get phosphate, but calcium, we have to increase that. All right? The cells, we got the osteogenic ones that just divide. Some of them then become osteoblasts, and the osteoblasts go on to become osteocytes. Sorry, everything come up all of a sudden right here. So from these osteogenic cells in the periosteum and the marrow, so around the outer parts, because as we build more bone, we convert to osteocytes within the bone itself. The osteoblasts don't divide, so that's why we can retain the osteogenic ones as long as we can. They're a source of osteoblasts for us, right? And they get very nearby. They're going to be all there together. So they're kind of showing you this on the. If we're in the matrix, we're probably an osteocyte. Okay, so that's what they're trying to give you back the context in the whole bone. The osteoclasts operate a lot in the endosteum, right? And they come from monocytes and macrophages. And again, macrophages come from monocytes. So ultimately, monocytes. Yeah, Cam?
I was just gonna say I just read the reasoning why red goes to yellow.
Uh-huh.
And it was, they said that they found the only correlation is that there's a relative level of stem cells.
Okay.
So when you're younger, you have way more red
marrow, okay, and you start to lose it.
And then it varies depending on how much
So you just convert to fat.
Yeah.
Okay, yep. That's understandable. Yeah, like I said, everything, as I always say, everything goes to fat and fiber, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's just, that's our planned obsolescence, right? So, and so this activity of these cells is balanced, right? Balanced producing and destroying to suit your needs. So we're gonna have to talk about how those needs work, right? But that's what we want to understand, right? Get homeostasis. It's always about homeostasis in the class, right? So you're going to try to keep up. And of course, we know what happens when you don't, right? We get this cases of osteomalacia and leading to osteoporosis, right? That's just a lifetime of being unbalanced because it doesn't happen overnight, right? You've got so much bone that this is a very gradual process. All right, so we've already really kind of touched on this, but we might as well, we do have to talk about how they're different. I do ask that. I'm sure I asked that on the quiz. I know I'm probably going to ask it on the test. So this cartoon is really close to, your model in front of you guys. All right, again, here's a lot of compact bone. They took this from the diaphysis of this long bone. All right, and they're saying, okay, here's your setup. Okay, so these are osteons. The whole pillar it's called the functional unit, an osteon. It's also known as a Haversian system. Those two words mean the same thing. I tend to go towards osteon just because Haversian is a proper name and is not always so obvious to students, but both names it's the same thing. All right, and then that's what it looked like, and that's what you guys looked at to identify bone tissue on your practical, if that was on your practical, right? To discriminate, it was these lovely, osteons. So osteons are always organized around a central canal, because I said that's where your blood is. And these are very active cells. They need lots of oxygen, lots of nutrients, calcium included, right, coming in through the blood. And so you have to have a way to deliver blood through a rock. And so you have these central canals, because it's in the middle of that, all right? And so in that middle, and then they show you, then you have a nerve in there, because the bone is very sensitive. Anybody who's broken or hurt their bones, right? You're sensitive. Okay, so that we're gonna work through. Lamellae is then these layers. Okay, so layers of each one, because this gets asked on your next practical all the time. Is that we'll have a couple of these models sitting out and say, name this part, name that part. It's really not hard. It's just keeping it straight. All right. There are perforating canals. You generally see it from the side. So when we're looking, this bone is 3 dimensions. So sometimes they're called Volkmann's. I always joke and say it looks like little ant colonies, right? So the Volkmann's canals or perforating canals are all in here, and they show a little better with all the blood vessels and nerves moving through them. Again, because I gotta really supply all this tissue with nutrients. All right, and again, you've got compact for compression. Right, resist compression, so you're not getting shorter. It's not like, I always say to people, it's not like a marshmallow, right? Squeeze and it's suddenly very short. Provides support and protection. This is a great way to construct, right, yourself, your tissue. That's what you want. And then, like I said, here would be where we're starting to go into the marrow. So this would be part of the end osteum covering this, and this would be the periosteum right here, right? And that's what I said. So we'd see some osteoblasts and osteoclasts in an area like this, and in an area out here, especially the blasts out there. All right. So spongy is not organized into these nice, right, osteons like that. They don't have these concentric lamellae. So concentric means just nested within each other. Circles within circles within circles, concentric. All right. So spongy lets you redistribute weight easier. Allows movement. It's called cancellous trabecular because of its appearance. So here's a big bone. They've just cut through it here. All right. And this is going to be in the epiphyses, both the distal and proximal. And this is going to be found in a lot of the rest of the skeletal bones. If it's not a long bone, short, irregular, right, flat, you probably going to have more spongy than compact. There'll always be a layer of compact. That's why bone looks so smooth. And that's what's kind of cool about when you had some real bones in there, and because they've undergone some wear and tear from students in the past, it's down, you eroded away the compact, and you see the spongy right there. So, and you see it on the epiphyses. You're not seeing it on the diaphyses of those bones. You're seeing it on the epiphyses. So look at that when you're in class. You are seeing the trabecular bone because it just had a thin covering. It was once there. It just, like I said, it's so thin, it eroded away as the bones rubbed together from years of being used by students and instructors. All right? And in between here, again, so these lamellae, you've got some of this, you've got bone marrow, red bone marrow in there. You still have these little canals. I forgot to mention that on the last one. Right? So canaliculi are the little holes, tiny canals from between the osteocytes. So when you look at that, that's hard to see on your models, but as it looks like something's radiating out sideways, those are tiny, tiny canals, not the perforated canals. These are much smaller. And so canaliculi are here. They're like little lines. So here, all these little lines you see moving this way, those are canaliculi. Right? So here, again, you've still got some canaliculi, little canal openings here. It looks different and acts differently. Right? Again, the lamellae are not concentrically aligned really. You've still got osteoclasts here. You've still got osteocytes in lacunae, all right? And some osteoblasts for new bone. But not organized the same way. Okay, that's what I'm saying. They don't need to be. No central canals. Okay? Not just bunches of osteons, like compact bones. And again, this allows spongy bone to be a shock absorber. And that's why it's at the area where two bones come in contact, because that's where you're going to get the most force, right? And you really, that's important. So the force would otherwise be transferred. If this was a solid wall, the force would be transferred to the next object, and it might be enough to break the bone. But by having spongy bone, the force is actually absorbed by the soft tissues. It's the same reason why, you know, in newer cars, and this is probably since the 80s, I'd say, right? As opposed to the 60s and 70s and before that, newer cars are actually made to crumple on contact, right? So when you have a collision, why does it crumple? Because you're transferring the force of the collision to the car's body, not to you. A person in an older, more solid state car that I used to call Land Cruisers, right? The big old things like old people like to drive, right? When they hit something, they're much more likely to be hurt, actually, because the force of the impact is transferred through the body of the car to them. They're much more likely to have brain injury than a person in a modern car. There's a reason we make cars the way we do. So it literally looks like these cars they collapse on impact. And I'm like, they're supposed to. That means they've stopped the force from hitting you, right? And that's what you want. So your car may look like crap, but you don't have brain damage, right? Because that's why people in low impact collisions can have extreme problems if they're in a solid car. So you've got the same basic physics governing this, right? When these bones are hitting together, this helps absorb the shock of the impact of these structures. And like I said, it makes movement a whole lot easier too. So it's cool. You've got purpose in everything about you, all right? Okay, so how does the bone develop and form? We call this process ossification, just like the process of making cells is hematopoiesis, ossification. So osteoblasts, right, make the matrix on pre-existing connective tissue. So here's the way it worked. While you were forming, and we talk a little bit about this in chapter 3, and we won't talk a whole lot more in this course. We end AP2 with a little bit of development biology, but we are limited due to time. Okay? So when you were forming, right, that ectoderm and mesoderm and endoderm, a lot of your connective tissue came from the mesoderm, all right? And from that mesoderm, you started producing a lot of cartilage. Now, why not bone yet? Because I told you already, you don't know what you're going to do after you're born, right? And you have to get out of mom, all right? So you need your bones to be very flexible. Cartilage is a whole lot more flexible than rock, isn't it? Yeah. So what I need is I need everything in its right place. And I need a shape. I need the outline. It's like drawing a picture, right? Versus filling it in with plaster or something like that, or drawing a cardboard model, and then making the material. That's us, right? So we need and have a shape because of cartilage. So if you look at an embryo to a fetus, right? Embryo is about 8 weeks after conception. That's the end of the embryological, and then you become a fetus. Well, you're about this big, but you're a little human. Oh yeah, you got your head shaped, right? You got your fingers and toes and your arms. Everything's there. It's just not there the way it's going to be finalized. But you have the template in place, and it's cool. But if you didn't, you wouldn't look like that. You'd be a little blob like Jello. Okay, I mean seriously, that's what you'd be, and that's not what you are. Just 8 weeks. It took just 8 weeks to get there. That's pretty cool, right? So. But after that, you transition into the fetal stage. A couple more weeks will go by, and then about week 12, you're going to start putting down bone, right? And that's when mom really needs to be taking in a lot more calcium in the pregnancy, because you're going to start taking up her calcium, and you're going to start using it now to make, right, bone tissue, not cartilage, right? So. That is called ossification. I'll get you in just a second, Alice. And this is going to go on starting in about week 12 till way into your second or third decade. You're not going to be finished. Most of you probably are not finished with your ossification in this class yet. So it's a long, drawn-out process. What were you going to say, Alex? Or ask Alex?
What are prenatal vitamins? Like, what all the...
So they're going to have those additional nutrients in them. Yeah. So they're especially going to be pertinent for, your vitamin D's, your calciums for and absorption, and then a number of the other ones like the B vitamins. We recommend higher doses of that because again, a mom is putting together a baby cell by cell. I mean, honestly, she is, because all that comes is the DNA from mom and dad to do. The instruction manual's there, none of the assembly stuff, right? So that's really what a pregnancy is.
Would you personally advise a pregnant person to take prenatal vitamins?
I would say if you are planning to get pregnant, start the prenatals even before the pregnancy. Yeah, that's I think a fair advice to anybody. But yeah, I would say they're cheap. Be sure that you get that. Don't try to mix and match your vitamins because there are some excesses of vitamins, especially like vitamin A, which can actually cause birth defects and problems with the craniofacial assembly.
Okay.
Somebody else have a question? Thank you.
Yeah, I was like, what is your perspective on vitamins? Because I mean, I've
okay, now first it's another class, all right, and we're going to talk about vitamins here. So we are going to get to this and what they contribute to the process of ossification of
more
bone
so
formation.
like pills, not necessarily like.
Well, I'll tell you this. We're always going to tell people if you can get it from your food, do that.
Yeah.
Okay, period. But the problem is that people don't always have access, or it can be a socioeconomic. You can't afford. Yeah. For God's sake, why don't they subsidize not iceberg lettuce? That should take it off the market, right? But like leaf lettuce, why don't they supplement that? Why are we supplementing corn or subsidizing corn? Right? Why? I don't know. Because corn has very, very little nutritive value in it. Honestly, that's what I'm saying. Why do we subsidize that? All right, and make that the basis of our food. But yeah, if you can get it from your food, it's always going to be better. But the problem is that people just can't for a variety of reasons. And for that reason, it's a chemical. A vitamin is just a chemical, just like it's a chemical in that food. And so it really doesn't matter to the body. Why it's better to get it from your other foods is because with that vitamin that you're interested in are a lot of other chemicals that we don't all know what it is, and we don't know what all it does, and so we call them phytochemicals or flavonoids, and they have some magic to them, right? But they're important. We just haven't always really understood everything in our food. Please understand that, right? So we do what we'd rather that, but rather than risk somebody have a deficiency, because most of these vitamins, at least the way they come traditionally sold, like over-the-counter Walmart, all right? You're not going to get, unless you're overdosing yourself, just taking a bunch at once, you're not even going to take it up. So if it's water-soluble, like B's and C's, you're going to pee it away, all right? If it's fat-soluble, like A, D, E, and K, you can build a toxic level faster, and that is a problem. So we do like to say to people, look, you do have, as humans, a recommended daily allowance. Please be careful if somebody's advising you to go over that they have a good reason. As I said last time about questioning authority, right? There's nothing wrong with questioning authority. Why are you saying that? Can you give me a paper? Can you cite a reference why I should be doing this, okay? But yes, chemically, there isn't a difference, right? I mean, a chemical is a chemical to the body, okay? But we would rather see, and it is, but you can overdose and you can clearly underdose on vitamins and minerals. So, you know.
The omega 12 versus 6 and 3. One of our biochemists that told us that you shouldn't even waste your time with omega 3s because your liver will break down the omega 3 when you use it. So if you do 12s, you can break down to way more things than you can possibly break down on omega 3s.
But
you get oversaturated with omega 3s and they can't, they don't do as much as they could have otherwise.
Yeah, so there really is. My general advice in a busy world is I say to people, if it's not going to kill you and you don't mind, you got the money, go ahead and do it. That's a cop out, but but first and foremost, make sure it's not going to kill you. Right? That's really my advice to anybody. All right, and then if it makes you feel better, we know there's a placebo effect. This is very real. Please don't scoff at that, and we have no idea why. Which is cool to me, by the way. Right? Yeah, we have no idea why it works. Right? If people even know that because you could say, oh well, you don't know. No, they know, and they still have an effect. So that means that there's something to believe, and I'm like, and that's way beyond my expertise, right? In science, right? So I don't want to scoff at things. So you're not going to memorize this table for me, but this is a nice way to lay out your life, right? And your conversion to rock. Right, we all harden with age, don't we? Right, so here's your actual. So you can always tell that to people. I'm just age. I'm getting hardened with age. Right. So you do. It does take a long.
Why does it take longer for the male's bones to be completely?
It's puberty. Puberty is a little bit later in males and a little earlier in females. Right. And that's a species strategy. That's just the way. Okay. So. Again, it begins right about 12 weeks or so in utero, right before you're ever born. It ends, it really debates, there's individual variation, so they're saying within the second decade, but it may be a little bit longer, maybe a little sooner in some people.
So why it ends in females by 23 years?
Well, yeah, we go through puberty first as a species, and at that point, the high levels of estrogen, I'm going to be talking about this, so if you're all thinking, boy, we're getting off track today. No, we're not. Actually, we're actually right on track for your understanding. So in estrogen and progesterone and testosterone have huge influences on both. And what they do is they expedite or hurry up the ossification process. And that's because at that point you are mature in the biological sense. When you can have young, you're mature. All right? We're not looking for age-old wisdom and everything in biology because a lot of species don't live that long, right? So we're looking for you're mature, which means you can carry a child, which means your bones better be pretty well formed to support that extra, right? Because you can tell looking at a woman who's been pregnant, it was at post-mortem, in her hips, she will have all kinds of pitting, where it's just stretched and pulled. Now, you don't have to see it on the outside, right? It doesn't disfigure you in any way, but it changes her, right?
So, like when a 16-year-old gets pregnant, is that going to damage?
No, I'm afraid it won't. All right, so our species is actually, I'd love to say that. Here's it, because we really don't want 16-year-olds getting pregnant. It's really not ideal, right? But no. In fact, they are technically biologically in their prime, all right, and they're going to be fine because the bones they needed to support that pregnancy are actually strong enough.
At one point, we didn't need them to actually be able to have a kid because a lot of societies would die out if they didn't have kids.
Yeah, it's all about species survival. So yeah, so what's happening here is that the slowness of ossification really has a lot to do with whether or not that bone was supporting something. So some of the slowest ossifying are up in here, where they're protective enough, but they're not supporting weight of any sort, so they take a little bit longer. Okay?
When does it end?
So again, within like the second or third decade of life, it would be the whole ossification process. Now, bone continues to change throughout our lives. or else you wouldn't see people with osteoporosis, right? Because that's clearly a change in bone. All right, so the overview again, we've got two basic processes that are very, very similar. So I don't see myself writing a really amazing question on the exam to get you to discriminate. The most amazing question will be, okay, which bone does this, right? Because the intramembranous, so within the membrane, are really the cranial bones, and a lot of the facial bones, and some of the axial, but intramembranous, it starts off, so in utero, again, because you're not a bone yet, this is an intramembranous ossification. So in utero, what we'd see is we'd see a sheet of dense connective tissue. That's what we're calling the membrane. So within that membrane, we'll start building bone, okay? Endochondral is within cartilage. And that is most of your appendicular skeleton is going to be an endochondral ossification, all right? And so we either start with a dense connective tissue or we start with cartilage itself, but we're going to convert it to bone, all right? So I say again, this is a framework. I said that's the template. It's giving you good shape. We can tell you're a little human. You're so cute, right? It's too flexible for support. That's why, but you didn't need that. You're floating in a sea of water, right? This is a great thing about being in utero, right? So these chondrocytes, right, the cells of the cartilage, will have to be replaced with osteocytes. That's the process of ossification. So we're going to see osteoblasts being active, osteoclasts being active, and chondrocytes and osteocytes. So these are our players. That's what I'm telling you here. All right, and I just want to give them a role. I just want them to do something here. So we now know that right here, at least in endochondral, we have a lot of these chondrocytes. In intramembranous, it'd probably be fibroblasts, right? Something that's built the tissue. All right, so here's just some cartoons to kind of look this over here. Intramembranous looks kind of like this, right? You'd have these, again, mesenchymal is a generic term for it comes from the mesoderm, right? And it's a pre-tissue, basically. Mesenchyme is generally a pre-tissue. Got some collagen in there, because I said it's dense connective tissue. And in the middle, ossification center. In the middle, intramembranous. And so you'd start to form little bits of bone. You'd have osteoblasts in the beginning, because they're the builders, right? And as they continued on, right, they'd get converted to osteocytes in the middle, and the osteoblasts would just keep radiating out. See how that's what's doing there? Right? And again, there's no short answer question on your test that says, okay, describe for me how intramembranous ossification works. But this is how it works, okay? So in time, if we then look at the bone, we would have, right, this nice, because I said this intramembranous is most of the skull. You'd have a lot of spongy bone, and that's what you'd put down first, even in long bone. You'd put spongy down, right? Because it's like building a house, right? You're going to put down all these, right? And then you're going to fill everything in. You're going to put down all these boards and get, you're not going to make the solid pieces right away. You're going to do it in steps. So you are still surrounded by this undetermined mesenchyme, and here's our osteoblasts all lined up, and they're just going to keep on building out. All right? So, and then we'd have our periosteum, because we retain that, right? We started with dense connective tissue, we still have dense connective tissue on the outside. Blood vessels begin to invade, right? They weren't here, so this is really important, because the blood vessels brought in more nutrients, so as soon as I get more nutrients, I can build more bone, right? I can start making red marrow here as well. So all these spaces are filled in, right? I say here, does not involve chondrocytes, because I might ask you a question about, what cells are involved in intramembranous, what bones do intramembranous. It might be a good test question or quiz question. Right? They don't have chondrocytes or osteoclasts at this point. It's a conversion of these mesenchymal cells, sorry, osteogenic, typo, forgive me, right, to osteoblasts, which secrete this substance, right, rock, osteoid. And the osteoblasts become osteocytes. Okay? That's really what we see going on here. All right, endochondral ossification. So here's our little template of this long bone, clearly I can see it. And that's what I said, that's why you can see arms and legs on an embryo, all right? It's not there immediately, but it shows up pretty soon, right? And it's certainly very evident by about 8 weeks after conception. So these will be chondrocytes. You're going to replace all this hyaline cartilage because it's just solid hyaline cartilage, which cartilage, again, doesn't have a lot of blood vessels in it. So you can see that, again, this blood is very key, and the blood vessels growing into the tissue is very key to this conversion. All right? So we've got these mesenchymal cells again, so these undetermined cells that become chondrocytes instead of fibroblasts and dense connective tissue. They are in the middle, in the middle they're growing, and they're dying. Now I would speculate, because I've actually never checked this, so they die because they're probably too far away from blood. But that's good, we want them to die, because we want to replace them with bone. Remember again, cartilage doesn't have blood in it. But they grow, calcium, they become calcified, and cells die. So calcium, nutrients lacking, kills them. Blood vessels then move in, okay? They bring, so the osteogenic cells are migrators, right? Because remember, you're in developmental. There's a lot of things changing for you right now. So the osteogenic cells invade with the blood vessels. So as these blood vessels, this dies off and there's space, the blood vessels actually, and it's soft tissue still, remember that's why the blood vessels come in. They come in, they're attracted to this area, and they bring osteogenic cells, okay? And these osteogenic cells produce the osteoblasts, which just start doing what osteoblasts do. They build the bone, right? They use the calcium that was there, right, with the calcified, and they get other calcium from the blood, and they start making, right, osseous tissue. So this perichondrium, so that just means around the cartilage, so there is connective tissue that kind of becomes a periosteum, right, as I show you here. That's not a big deal, just change in name.
Blood vessels migrate into the what?
So they migrate into this center. So they actually come in first. The connective tissue surrounding here actually has a lot of cues, chemical cues, that allow the blood vessels, and that where they invade is where you're going to start to see the change. So they actually do come in a very specific area, but that area is where the cartilage cells have died. And their death has probably called the blood vessels in, angiogenesis, and it's probably called the osteogenic cells in.
So it migrates to the middle of this mesoderm?
Yeah, so this is going to be the diaphysis, right? So that's what we call a primary ossification center, right? Yes, Kale, we're almost done. Just hang on, Mariah.
I was actually reading about this when you were here. So the osteocytes, they calcify around themselves, they close themselves in.
Yeah.
And then the more that they do that, the more it signals that there's no blood flow or there's no communication. So whenever you have a certain amount, then that's when the blood goes back and rejuvenates them. And then they slowly do that over again. They do it over and over.
Yeah, so they layer. Okay,
so it's like a
okay.
cycle.
Yeah, and so you've got, again, and the key I want you guys to walk away from is saying that, or walk away with, all right, not from, right, don't run away from this, all right, no, walk away with this idea that, right, you start with cartilage, you got these chondrocytes, they grow to a point, and then they die. They die as they accumulate calcium, blood vessels come in, and blood vessels bring these osteogenic cells, which produce some osteoblasts, and we retain some osteogenic cells, and we just start building. And we said, the perichondrium gets which produces even more bone. So we start building from the inside, and we start building from the outside, is what we're saying here, okay? But the point again for you guys is, here's this conversion going on from cartilage to bone. And would be called endochondral, would be occurring really in our long bones. My last thought again, just if you look closely, we'll pick back up on this next week, but long bones continue to get longer, so we're really now focusing in on, right, this, in the metaphysis, right, the epiphyseal plate. So the zone between the diaphysis and the epiphysis, this is our growth zone. And so you see again, cartilage. So before puberty, you know, as we were asking about this, because again, ossification takes a long time, right? You would have chondrocytes because, you know, before you were born, you started this conversion in your long bones, like, as well as other bones, but in the long bones, and you needed enough support so that you could crawl, and you could walk, and you could get upright. But you didn't, you needed, the trade-off, you needed some area that you could still add more bone. And so that's what we call the epiphyseal plate. And it's remarkable because it retains these chondrocytes, these cartilage cells, and they keep on dividing. And as they divide from both ends, think about what's happening at both ends, as they keep dividing, the bone gets longer. All right? And this would continue until there's an excess of steroid hormones, right? Testosterone in males and estrogen in females, that actually expedites the death, right? Speeds up the death of these cells and their replacement by strictly bone. And that's why you just don't get taller, technically, after you've finished, right? Puberty. Unless something else changes genetically, most people are not going to get taller. Now, bone will still build, but you won't get taller. So,
isn't it true that we could get shorter?
Oh yeah, it's true, it's true. Because we erode a little bit, or like, you can see exactly how this would happen. These things start to collapse a bit, right? So your whole spinal cord, right? And there is some, right? We don't replace bone as effectively as we age. Some bones fuse. Now, you may not even realize this because if they fuse, they may not affect the nerve at all, and then you wouldn't even realize it. Okay, I have a fusion in my thoracic region. It's hardly ever bothers me, right? Because I had a really bad accident when I hit the ground so hard and it fused together, right? If it had happened down here, it'd be a whole lot more of a problem, right? But it happened in the right area, so you may not even realize you have that, right? But yes, so bones begin to fuse as we age because our soft tissues just don't replace themselves as well, and they get damaged through time. So yes, you absolutely do get shorter. Kind of shriveled away little hobbits, right? So we'll pick this back up, and I hope you enjoy your lab a little bit more.